Wow, it's really been a while since I've done something like this, hasn't it? I think the last one I did was when Steve was a little relevant. Aye, whatever. This is new stuff now. Titled, and it's very long, The Only Rival to Rivals of Aether is Itself. Wow, that was a long one. It was made by Rottweiler, a pretty popular figure in the space. But I guess the question on everyone's minds is, why are you doing a response to it? Well, I just disagree with some of the points that Rott's made, and I wanted to give a little bit of insight to the other side of what people are arguing. Before that, let me tell you a few things. 1. I would recommend that every single person look at the video in question first. I'm going to put it in the description and also the comment section so that you can have a little bit of an understanding. 2. I would recommend that people that after you see the arguments on my video, please don't go to Rott and try to, do a lot of stuff and try to harass him or anything. Like, if you go in to talk about points, that's something different, but please don't do that. It's just not cool. 3rd, yes, I'm going to rip this band-aid off. Yes, I responded to Rott in his own comment section with my own points before this video, and yes, he had a retort to it. Don't look at that and base an entire idea that you have of this guy just because of one interaction. There's lots of things that could have happened at that point. Not only that, I'd rather look at the arguments that he's made rather than the retorts afterward. This is less about drama and more so trying to understand both sides anyway. So, after all that, let's get some of the introductory points out of the way and then we'll go into the big one. And just so I don't take them out of context, I will put in clips fully of the things that I'm talking about, just so that I can argue against it.
And now we're going to move over to the second part of this video. I feel like this game is becoming Trevor's game. This is not Dan's game anymore. And I feel like you can see that when you look at the character design. Trevor and Dan have two different philosophies when it comes to fighting games, or platform fighting games, melee, whatever. Dan cares more about fun. Trevor cares more about practicality and honestly just bare bones gameplay.
Hey Trevor, why can't I wall jump after up special?
Because there's ledges. Next question.
Hey, wait. I will say I've put some kinks because everyone right now it's been a little bit of when I was at Heatwave too, people were asking me. And I said our defense, and then they asked more questions, and I was like, you gotta talk to Trevor. Because last time we were talking about something. We were talking about, I forget. It's something up special. And I was like, wait, what
Crag.
if... Oh yeah, Crag can, when you pillarless. And I was like, well, do we foresee a world on Zetterburn where as long as you go, you don't go up at all? And we're not at that stage yet, but there's some gears turning of wait, if you don't go up, if you use the move to go down, could you wall jump? So right now you can't, even on Zetterburn. I think we gotta just tweet at Trevor, Be like, hey Trevor, would it be cool if ...
Yeah. Don't get your hopes up.
Maple is the only character in that game to me that has any semblance or resemblance of Dan ideas.
The Trevor versus Dan sort of points that he brings up a little bit are very interesting. Dan is supposedly the creative guy, Trevor is more so the bare bones gameplay sort of guy. And although one interaction with what he showed you might let you believe that, I'm not so sure. There's either two frames of mind that you could have for this argumentation. Either this is actually true, but it's not as impactful as you think, or it's not true at all. Let's say it's less impactful. A lot of the arguments that were even said in his own video, even if the fact that Trevor isn't going into more creative things, it doesn't really mean that Dan doesn't approve of it. There's a reason why he doesn't, and maybe we're just ignoring that. They were talking about jump canceling when it comes to the up being on stage when it comes to Crag and Rivals 2, right? Although you do see disdain when it comes to Trevor and the fact that maybe we can add this property to when Sylvanas doesn't use upways but downwards like Crag does, I don't really think it's because he doesn't want things to be creative. I think it's just about how do you program that? How can you tell the game that there's properties different from up B going up and up B going down in order to jump cancel from the sort of edge of the ledge? It actually seems very complicated, and not only that, but you'd have to balance that move regardless of what you're doing. So not only would you have to figure out how to tell the difference, in those properties, but you'd also have to balance it. I'm not saying this is what Trevor was thinking, but it does seem plausible for what it is. This means that like critiquing Dan for what he was saying wasn't really like a I hate creativity, and I think it's just more so like how legitimately are we going to do this even if we were to put it in the game, and how are we going to balance it? I don't think Trevor really hates that. I think he's just like, how do we make it appropriate? So if you're of the side that Trevor is actually like he can only do bare bones gameplay and he's more so like not letting Dan go free, I think there's argumentation in order to say like, well, maybe there's kind of a reason why he has to be so anal about it. It would probably be a lot of work, and it would also like really be bad like day one or week one, like you have all these cool mechanics, but then like Rivals 1 players realize that like it's not balanced around that, and like you're just having a bad time with it. And you know, tugging at the creativity a little bit, like tugging it in, doesn't really seem that bad. And I think saying that Trevor is just the bare bones gameplay guy doesn't really like accentuate how important his job is. But let's look at the other aisle, and let's just say that maybe Trevor and Dan is not even like a bare bone gameplay experience versus creativity thing, and this is all just kind of made up. I kind of call this the Sakurai effect. Don't get me wrong, Sakurai has done a lot when it comes to Smash Bros in general and some of the design when it comes to these games, but I'm pretty sure he doesn't do all of it. You know, he manages, he puts some of his own ideas in there, but you know, he has a whole team. I'm pretty sure like the whole team has a plethora of ideas that they actually made that was incorporated in the game. It's just that Sakurai doesn't really talk about it because it's like, what, like 100 people working on it? This could really be the same as this, where because Dan is like the face of the company, it's really easy to put in not only the good but also the bad things that happen in the game on him. So it's like creative things for characters, you know, a lot of modes and things like that, whatever it may be. But the thing is, Dan could have probably gotten a lot of ideas from other people that were just in the group, and they're just not really talking about it. I mean, there's already information about him letting Trevor like explain to him how Smash Defense actually works and how they're going to incorporate that in the Rivals 2 anyway. And who's to say like any sort of creative thing in Rivals 1 was only Dan and it couldn't have been anyone else? But why are you bringing this up, Software Neos? Well, I'm bringing it up because it's like the video really puts like Dan's ideas as though it's the forefront and that he should be doing a lot more when it comes to it, when sure, he might have some ideas, but a lot of the other things that other people have done is probably in the team already and they're already discussing. Which could mean that this idea then it's like one guy with gameplay and then one guy with creativity isn't really a thing at all, and it's just like a group discussion, but we're just funneling in so much because Rivals 2 is different. Again, whatever argument you want to do, whether it's like, no, Trevor is the bare bones guy, or he's not, and it's just like a collaborative effort, there's still like arguments that you can make that it's not really as like two ideologies fighting for each other in this game when they're actually a lot more connected than you think. I mean, to be fair, Dan is like the director of it. If he didn't really want to hear what Trevor has to say, he could have simply just ignored it, but he clearly, you know, funneled his vision and let him take the reins when it comes to that thing. And personally, I think it's for a good reason. If I had to pick one to stick to, it would probably be that, yes, Trevor is the gameplay guy, and maybe you think it's a little bare bones, but the reason why he looks like he's clashing with Dan at that point is not really so that he doesn't want like people to be creative, and it's really just how is this going to work in the game, how is it going to be due diligent, and how are we going to balance it? Especially when the team already has to deal with single player modes, like additional story type beats and like a lot of character ideas. It's like, it seems like a lot. So to pull in those reins, again, seems very appropriate. The only other thing or argument that you could use is that like the three things aren't really here, like ledge boosting, baby dashing, and drifty eye. But we have heard that ledge boosting and baby dashing are actually still in the game. They're just repurposed to make them a little easier for the audience. So really, the only thing that is being taken away from Rivals 1 is definitely drift DI. And this is definitely the crux of where I come in.
And it scares me because it confirms how I feel about Rivals 2, and that it's not a sequel. It is a reboot of the series. There are so many core mechanics just removed from the game that it doesn't feel like the same game. Pummel Special, Ghetto Special, Lead Special. Replace the old, here's the new. That doesn't really feel like a sequel to me. It feels like you should build upon what the players liked. And nothing tells me I'm right more than Tekken 8. If the player base loved baby dashing and ledge boosting so much, and it didn't hurt the game, why would that be on the back foot? Why wouldn't that just be such a natural progression into the sequel? That's what a sequel would do. It would look at what the players loved to do in the first game. The heat mechanic literally takes characters' most iconic moves and most iconic traits and amplifies them. That is essentially exactly what I wanted Rivals 2 to do.
I'm gonna talk about the Tekken thing first because I think it's very important and it leads into everything else. Because on one aisle, I see where you're coming from, and then on the other aisle, I have to realize why this is a thing. Because he's right, Tekken did add a lot of things and a lot of tools that characters already had in the previous game, and that's what makes it so enhanced. It's not like the same, or rebooted as he says. But I just have one question, and this will lead on a path of where my mind is going. One question. In Tekken 8, can you block? The answer is yes. Now comes the second question for me, and that is, why does that matter? It matters because neutral is defined by the block button. Sure, there's a lot more mechanics that you can use in order to dictate neutral and things like that, but having a block is monumental. And the reason why I say this is because neutral in Rivals 1 versus Rivals 2 is now almost very completely different. There are 3 forms of defense that Rivals 1 has. That is movement options, parry, and of course, drift DI. Even Rottweiler has made this point, but parries make it so that it makes it very lackadaisious, the spacing that you have. At least when you only have them and you don't have any sort of shield to be with you.
But as I play Rivals 1 for so long, I realized parry is honestly its worst mechanic because it doesn't matter about spacing. Spacing is irrelevant when you have parries in a game. Shields reward great spacing. I realized that it doesn't matter how well I space these things because as long as it's a timing-based thing, parry, me being close versus me being far does not change the fact that parry will freeze me regardless. But a shield will reward me for my spacing.
Because if you had a shield in Rivals 1, it would be like very low risk. You can go in onto your opponent, and you don't necessarily have to be too pixel perfect with your movement. But because there's a lack of this mechanic in Rivals 1, you have to be pixel perfect in order to avoid a lot of things, whether that be normals, smash attacks, or projectiles. This essentially means that it is very different from Tekken 8 because with Tekken 8, at least you can block something in order to get in, and it's like a very low risk sort of thing. In Rivals 1, this is not really the case. It also means that you get hit a lot more often than you would in any other platform fighter. Things that can be like 2 pixels from your feet or whatever lets you get hit when a shield would have been beneficiary for it. Now this goes into the next thing, and that's drift DI.
Rivals, they said, let's dumb it down. Let's take away drift DI because it's too hard to combo off of, even if it fucked me up. Drift DI fucked me up, and I'm still would be like, it would be better to have it. Because it adds thinking, it adds depth, it adds more and more. It's richer. It's a richer game. It's what people need. It's expression. It's expression. That's why I like Rivals so much, because I always said that when I got hit, it feels like I'm always in the driver's seat in that game. And it's really because of drift DI. Because no matter how many times you hit me, it is still, where do I want you to take this combo? Where do I want you to tech chase me? Where do I want to go on the platforms? Where do I want to go to get edge guarded? That is what drift DI allows. And when you remove that, You are removing my voice.
See, parries are supposed to be a thing for on the ground sort of defense, but what happens when you're in the air? And what happens if you're in the air a lot? What you're going to have to do is master Drift DI so that you can get out of combos. But let me bring it back to you. This is why when you add shields and ledges in this game, everything changes. Because theoretically, at least, you shouldn't really be getting hit as much, and even if you do, because there's ledges, there's now another form of defense that you can use against someone. Makes defense sort of seem like a my turn, your turn scenario, rather than it be sort of a fumble of mechanics that we have to just play against each other. It also makes the Tekken 8 point look a little weird, because Tekken 8 didn't start with no blocking, it already had it, meaning it had like a fundamental sort of neutral game that was already perfected. But because we need more like players on our side and we want to actually try to strengthen the company, we have to make a game that a lot of people are going to play. And a lot of people don't want to really play a game where neutral is like Rivals 1. Where you need a hell of a good amount of movement, you're gonna get hit a lot, and there's not that many defensive options compared to a lot of other platform fighters. It makes the casual or intermediate player experience like really off-putting, because you're getting creamed by every single other person way more compared to other platform fighters. And this isn't to say make mechanics that like help intermediate players or beginner players, because I don't think that ever is going to be a thing in the first place. Because advanced players will always like have mechanics or master mechanics that can work for them more than the newbie opponents. But giving the players essentially not a lot of reason in order to like defend themselves so that they can slowly learn how to play the game, it doesn't really seem good to a lot of people, and I understand why. Again, good on Tekken 8 for giving a lot more characters tools or enhanced tools from the other game, that's great. But how are you going to enhance tools if your fundamentals aren't really strengthened first? Now characters not having enough tools or not enough new tools kind of makes sense, because from the ground up you had to change what Rivals is in order to get a lot of people to play your game. It also makes sense that Drift DI isn't here because of it. If you now have a block button so that you can have a way in order to deal with projectiles and people's momentum, if you have ledges for an additional defense in order to battle against people, well then why have Drift DI? It was explained you're in the driver's seat when you have sort of Drift DI in Rivals 1, but because you have these tools now that you can use against the opponent, it might seem as though it might be unnecessary. Because at least on paper, you won't be put into these scenarios at least as much compared to Rivals 1. And Trevor saying things it wasn't necessary for what we were making, honestly it doesn't sound like a bad thing. It sounds like it's kind of justifiable, because it's like, again, why would you have this thing if those scenarios, quote unquote, probably won't happen as much, and there's something new now. This is why I can't really compare it to Tekken 8. Cause sure, they have new tools, but they also knew what neutral was going to be like from the start. Imagine if Tekken 8 had to start from a beginning where it's like, there is no block button at all, and there was, you just got hit in that game just cause. You didn't space appropriately, you didn't go at an angle appropriately, well you just got hit cause there's no block button. I'm pretty sure if Tekken 8 had to start from a place where there was no blocking, they would first do a lot more grinding to see how they could give a lot more defensive mechanics, at least in order to help people out a little bit, and then they'd give them more tools. But because they kind of perfected it already, guess what? Now you can go crazy. But I'll say this one more time. If you're neutral, or you had to change how neutral works in your game so much, of course a lot of tools aren't going to be in the following game. Yes, Maple looks cool, she has a lot of tools, everyone else doesn't. It makes sense. And of course there's the retort right now of, you know, Rivals 2 and Genesis, but I can explain that too. From what I've heard on Twitter, because, you know, I'm waiting on Genesis clips in order to actually see it, but what I've heard on Twitter is that Rivals 2, especially during the tops, were like TOD simulators. That if we had Drift DI, then this wouldn't have happened in the first place. Again, this will probably be another video so I can explain it more in depthly, but there are a few arguments that can be used against this. This first argument, and this comes from, you know, the boy Neutral, you know, sub to him, I'll have everything out so that, you know, do the thing! But the first argument is that every single platform fighter doesn't need Drift DI. Literally every single other platform fighter has had ways in order for there not to be Drift DI, and you still feel as though that it's a back and forth when it comes to gameplay. So if your argument is that this game needs Drift DI or else it will fail, I'm sorry, I just don't agree. Secondly, you do realize that there's other things that the devs can do before you have to add in that whole mechanic, right? You could make DI stronger so that you could, you know, get out of combos that you probably shouldn't be put into. Or you can mitigate some moves or make it so that they don't combo as hard so that, you know, you can also do that. But even on a player by player basis, there are probably things that we could have done. Like, maybe I'm misremembering, but I'll look at it right now and then look back. But the first sort of event for Rivals 2, when there came to a tournament, I didn't really see a lot of people parrying. And I know it's just like, well, of course they're not parrying. The game just came out. But that's my point. The game hasn't even released yet. We don't know how it works. So of course things that may seem to problems on the outset probably aren't problems once you give it the old 1-2. So you add in this idea that the devs could literally just make it so that this doesn't really happen again, but also the fact that it's so new that nobody really knows how DI works, maybe because so many people are used to drift DIing rather than like regular DI, that maybe, just maybe, we don't need to have the argument of we need this mechanic in the game. I think Dan and the team, more than anyone else, knows exactly what they probably need to do in order to make this an experience that everyone can enjoy. And even if they don't know it from the day onward, I'm pretty sure by a week in the game's release date, they will figure out the issue and know exactly what they need to do and just fix it from then on. But again, that's probably only the little arguments that I have with this thing, and I would rather make another additional video talking about Drift DI in the game when more and more like Genesis stuff is being released. Alright, the conclusion. Rott wants to enjoy Rivals 2, I know he does. And I think his heart is trying to go into the right place. But I can definitely see a lot of his emotions being a little misplaced when it comes to like a lot of the things that Rivals 2 is doing. Because we can sit here and talk about how, you know, Rivals 2 is getting rid of a lot of mechanics, quote unquote. Or how maybe it's not as hype as it should be, or a lot more tools should be happening with a lot of characters. But I think taking time out of the day to understand why they're going this route will make this sort of concerns kind of go away. Rivals 2 needed a different system for neutral because we need to gather more people in order to play our game. So we add shields and we add ledges because guess what? A lot of people don't like getting hit, and a lot of people like defensive mechanics, at least when they're starting out, so that they can slowly climb rather than getting hit by everything. After we figure out those mechanics, we have to do our own mechanics and see if they make sense in order to be here. Drift DI probably does it, and if it does, we can probably do a few more things other than adding that whole mechanic in order to balance the game anyway. And as with the Tekken stuff, it's really easy in order to add tools in now when you don't have to basically start from scratch all over again. This is why I think the whole Trevor versus Dan thing, I don't really have any credence for it. I think Dan realizes that we need these things in order for things to be put into the game and for a lot more players in order to feel really good playing our game. And maybe we have to put in a little more elbow grease when it comes to putting in little sort of creative tidbits, because it just might break the game when we already just started to finally figure out neutral. I think all in all, there's going to be a lot of discussion about Rivals 2 versus Rivals 1, and I think it's going to be from the same place as what Rott did. You know, voice your frustrations, why isn't there more stuff like this? This doesn't feel like Rivals 2, it feels like 1.5. But I think my video has done at least somewhat of a decent thing in order to show people that there are reasons to why the game is what it is right now, and maybe there could be just a few compromises down the way. It's just that we're just focusing on the negative so much that it just seems like Rivals isn't Rivals anymore, when it is. And if you like Rivals 1 more than Rivals 2, all power to you. That's not the issue. The issue is looking at a few mechanics or a few things that Rivals 1 has and saying, why isn't it in Rivals 2? You should put this in Rivals 2. And, you know, Rott didn't say that, but, you know, a lot of people from the outset has said that, well, you need some of these mechanics or Rivals 2 isn't going to work out and it's just going to fail. When I think that's incorrect. Rivals 2 is the way that it is for very good reasons. And I understand the amount of passion that a lot of Rivals 1 fans might have that can really interlope in the Rivals 2 experience and why they might not enjoy it as much. But I can assure you that Dan and the team are doing their damnedest in order to make this a good experience, not just for you, but for every single person, new and old. I understand how you might be feeling right now, and I get it. Just look at the other side, so you can at least see where other people are coming from. And maybe down the line, because you understand, when Rivals 2 drops, you'll actually gain a little bit more of an appreciation for it. Alright, so let's get to the last thing. For any of you wondering, yes, I made a comment about, you know, his original video, and Rottweiler responded to it. Now, I guess what you'd explain is just like, oh no, there's beef, oh, there's drama, No, there is no drama with me and him. It was probably something that irked him one day. Maybe he didn't read it fully through, but I'm not going to hold that against Rott. He has his own reasons. Maybe he was feeling different a sort of day. Doesn't really have any skin on my bones. Instead of being petty and just looking at that and judging him forever because of one statement he had on me, why would I do that when I would rather just argue for the points and like discuss of how to make things better rather than just tarnish everyone? Even for what he said is there, I still recommend every single person to go over there to subscribe to him and, you know, just understand where he might be coming from. Because he's talked about it before about how, like, you know, anyone who's any sort of critique or critical about Rivals 2 always gets the short end of the stick. And maybe that's true. I have no idea. Maybe that's just his experience. I would just like to put the olive branch in just to say that there's different sort of ideas that you can look at this scenario, and I'd rather think about that and how, like, people think rather than just have misnomers at people. So for anyone that's trying to, like, let me, like, dunk on Rott or anything like that, I'm not doing that. We're just two different people, two different ideas, and I don't really hate him for it. But on the bright side, I did get a funny ass thumbnail from it, so take that as what you will. So yeah, this is my entire response to Rottweiler's video and about Rivals 2 in general. I might talk about Drifty Eye a little bit more, especially with Genesis clips might coming up. Probably do that afterward, we'll see. But that's all my thoughts. I'm sorry to bother everyone at this time, but, you know, I made a thing on my community post that I'm not really, I don't really have a job anymore right now. I had to resign so that I can go to a different area. And, you know, I have a PayPal, use your PayPal, give me money. But seriously, like, I don't really have a job right now. Anything to go to me is really appreciated. And it makes me, you know, hyped a lot more in order to do a lot more content in the future. So, if anything, it only benefits you, the people, than anything else. And I guess that's it. So, more content soon. And I love you all.